Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming together to immerse ourselves in a rich body of wisdom that we both inherit and contribute to. We are in a book of Deuteronomy, Parshat Ki Teitzei, which begins in chapter 21 with verse 10. We'll read through the English translation of our portion together, and then I'll share with you a focused study about it. And then we'll have our collective collaborative conversation about it. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this time together, we have the opportunity to give thanks for this moment. Baruch atah
Adonai,
Eloheinu melech haolam,
asher
asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Amen.
The opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Once again, we're in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 21, beginning with verse 10. When you take the field against your enemies, and Adonai your God delivers them into your power, and you take some of them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her, and would take her to wife, you shall bring her into your house, and she shall trim her hair, pare her nails, and discard her captive's garb. She shall spend a month's time in your house, lamenting her father and mother. After that, you may come to her and possess her, and she shall be your wife. Then, should you no longer want her, you must release her outright. You must not sell her for money. Since you had your will of her, you must not enslave her. If a man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved have borne him sons, but the firstborn is the son of the unloved one, when he wills his property to his sons, he may not treat as firstborn the son of the loved one in disregard of the son of the unloved one who is older. Instead, he must accept the firstborn, the son of the unloved one, and allot to him a double portion of all he possesses, since he is the first fruit of his vigor. The birthright is his due. Richard, would you like to read a little bit, starting with verse 18?
Yes, sure. Thank you. If a man has a wayward and defiant son who does not heed his father or mother and bring him out to and obey them even after they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town at the public place of his community. They shall say to the elders of his town, "This son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He does not heed us. He is gluttonous and a drunkard." Thereupon the men of the town shall stone him to death. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. All Israel will hear and be afraid. If a man is guilty of a capital offense and is put to death, and you impale him on a stake, you must not let his corpse remain on the stake overnight, but must bury him the same day. For an impaled body is an affront to God. You shall not defile the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess.
Thank you. And June, would you like to continue at the very start of chapter 22?
Thank you, Rabbi. If you see your fellow's ox or sheep gone astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your fellow. If your fellow does not live near you, or you do not know who he is, you shall bring it home, and it shall remain with you until your fellow claims it. Then you shall give it back to him. You shall do the same with his ass. You shall do the same with his garment. And so too shall you do with anything that your fellow loses and you find. You must not remain indifferent. If you see your fellow's ass or ox fallen on the road, do not ignore it. You must help him raise it. A woman must not put on man's apparel, nor shall a man wear woman's clothing. For whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord your God. If, along the road, you chance upon a bird's nest, in any tree or on the ground, with fledglings or eggs, and the mother sitting over the fledglings or on the eggs, do not take the mother together with her young. Let the mother go, and take only the young, in order that you may fare well and have a long life. When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, so that you do not bring blood guilt on your house if anyone should fall from it.
Thank you, June. Let me invite Dave. Would you like to continue at verse 9?
You shall not sow your vineyard with a second kind of seed, else the crop from the seed you have sown and the yield of the vineyard may not be used. I don't know what that means. You shall not plow with an ox and an ass together. You shall not wear cloth combining wool and linen. You shall make tassels on the four corners of the garment with which you cover yourself. A householder takes a woman as a wife and cohabits with her. Then he takes an aversion to her and makes up charges against her and defames her, saying, "This is the party I took to wife, but when I approached her, I found that she was not a virgin." In such a case, the girl's father and mother shall produce the evidence of the girl's virginity before the elders of the town at the gate. And the girl's father shall say to the elders, "To this party I gave my own daughter to wife, but he has taken an aversion to her, so he has made up charges, saying, I did not find your daughter a virgin. But here's the evidence of my daughter's virginity." And they shall spread out the cloth before the elders of the town. The elders of the town shall then take that party and flog him, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver and give it to the girl's father, for that householder has defamed a virgin in Israel. Moreover, she shall remain his wife. He shall never have the right to divorce her.
Thank you, Dave. Let me invite Margot. Would you like to read starting at verse 20?
Yes. But if the charge proves true, the girl was found not to have been a virgin, then the girl shall be brought out and to the entrance of her father's house, and the men of the town shall stone her to death, for she did a shameful thing in Israel, committing fornication while under her father's authority. Thus you will sweep away evil from your midst, of them. The man and the women with whom he lay shall die. This will sweep away evil from Israel. In the case of a virgin who is engaged to a man, if a man comes upon her in town and lies with her, if you shall take the two of them out to the gate of the town and stone them to death. The girl, because she did not cry out for help in the town, and the man, because he violated another man's wife. Thus you will sweep away evil from your midst. But if the man comes upon an engaged girl in the open country and the man lies with her by force, only the man who lay with her shall die. But you shall do. Sorry. But you shall do nothing to the girl. The girl did not incur the death penalty, for in this case, like that of a man attacking another and murdering him, he came upon her in the open. Though the engaged girl cried for help, there was no one to save her. If a man comes upon a virgin who is not engaged and he seizes her and lies with her, and they are discovered, the man who lay with her shall pay the girl's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife. Because he has violated her, he can never have the right to divorce her.
Thank you, Margot. Let me invite Mark Thompson. Would you like to continue at the start of chapter 23?
Sure, thank you. No man shall marry his father's former wife so as to remove his father's garment. No one whose testes are crushed or whose member is cut off shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. No one misbegotten shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. None of his descendants, even in the 10th generation, shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. No Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted into the congregation of the Lord. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever be admitted into the congregation of the Lord, because they did not meet you with food and water on your journey after you left Egypt, and because they hired Balaam, son of, right? Yeah, son of Beor from Bethor of Aram Naharim to curse you. But the Lord your God refused to heed Balaam. Instead, the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, for the Lord your God loves you. You shall never concern yourself with their welfare or benefit as long as you live. You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your kinsman. You shall not abhor an Egyptian, for you were a stranger in his land. Children born to them may be admitted into the congregation of the Lord to the 3rd generation.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Jim. Would you like to continue at verse 10?
Thank you, Rabbi. When you go out as a troop against your enemies, be on your guard against anything untoward. If anyone among you has been rendered unclean by a nocturnal emission, he must leave the camp, and he must not re-enter the camp. Toward evening, he shall bathe in water, and at sundown he may re-enter the camp. Further, there shall be an area for you outside the camp where you may relieve yourself. With your gear, you shall have a spike, and when you have squatted, you shall dig a hole with it and cover up your excrement. Since Adonai your God moves about in your camp to protect you and to deliver your enemies to you, let your camp be holy. Let him not find anything unseemly among you and turn away from you. You shall not turn over to his master a slave who seeks refuge with you from his master. He shall live with you in any place he may choose among the settlements in your midst. Wherever he pleases, you must not ill-treat him. No Israelite woman shall be a cult prostitute, nor any Israelite man be a cult prostitute. You shall not bring the fee of a whore or pay of a dog into the house of the Lord your God in fulfillment of any vow for both and abhorrent to Adonai your God.
Thank you so much. Robert, would you like to continue that verse 20?
Yes, thank you. Thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything that is lent upon usury. Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury. But unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all that thou settest thine hand to the land whither thou goest to possess it. When thou shalt vow a vow unto the Lord thy God, thou shalt not slack to pay it, for the Lord thy God will surely require it of thee, and it would be sin in thee. But if thou shalt forbear to vow, it shall be no sin in thee. That which is gone out of thy lips thou shalt keep and perform, even a free will offering, according as thou hast vowed unto the Lord thy God, which thou hast promised with thy mouth. When thou comest unto thy neighbor's vineyard, then thou mayest eat grapes thy fill at thine own pleasure, but thou shalt not put any in thy vessel. When thou comest into the standing corn of thy neighbor, then thou mayest pluck the ears with thine hand, but thou shalt not move a sickle unto thy neighbor's standing corn.
Thank you so much, Robert. Catherine, would you like to continue at the very start of chapter 24?
Thank you, Rabbi. A man takes a wife and possesses her. She fails to please him because he finds something obnoxious about her, and he writes her a bill of divorcement, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house. She leaves his household and becomes the wife of another man. Then this latter man rejects her, writes her a bill of divorcement, hands it to her, and sends her away from his house. Or the man who married her last dies. Then the first husband who divorced her shall not take her to wife again, since she has been defiled, for that would be abhorrent to the Lord. You must not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage. When a man has taken a bride, he shall not go out with the army or be assigned to it for any purpose. He shall be exempt 1 year for the sake of his household, to give happiness to the woman he has married. A hand mill or an upper millstone shall not be taken in pawn, for that would be taking someone's life in pawn. If a man is found to have kidnapped a fellow Israelite, enslaving him or selling him, that kidnapper shall die. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst.
Thank you, Catherine. And let me invite Linda. Would you like to read a little bit, starting with verse 8? Okay. Your audio doesn't seem to be on, Linda, so. Okay, well, we'll come back to you. Okay, let me invite David and Susan. If you'd like to continue there at verse 8.
Thank you, Rabbi. In cases of a skin affection, be most careful to do exactly as the Levitical priests instruct you. Take care to do as I have commanded them. Remember what your God Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt. When you make a loan of any sort to your compatriot, you must not enter the house to seize the pledge. You must remain outside while the party to whom you made the loan brings the pledge out to you. If the party is needy, you shall not go to sleep in that pledge. You must return the pledge at sundown, that its owner may sleep in the cloth and bless you, and it will be to your merit before your God, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh.
You shall not exploit a poor or an indigent employee from your brothers or from your aliens who are in your land, in your gates. You shall give him his pay in his day, and the sun shall not set on it, because he is poor, and he maintains his life by it. So he won't call against you to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and it will be a sin in you. Fathers shall not be put to death for sons, and sons shall not be put to death for fathers. They shall each be put to death through their own sin. You shall not bend judgment of an alien or an orphan, and you shall not take a widow's clothing as security. And you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, redeemed you from there. On account of this, I command you to do this thing. When you reap your harvest in your field, and you'll forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and take it. It shall be the aliens and the orphans and the widows, so that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, will bless you and all your hands' work. When you'll beat your olive trees, you shall not do a bow afterward. It shall be the aliens and the orphans and the widows. When you cut off grapes from your vineyard, you shall not glean afterward. It shall be the aliens and the orphans and the widows. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Account of this, I command you to do this thing.
Thank you so much, both of you. Let me invite Rose. Would you like to continue at the start of chapter 25?
What, at the beginning of chapter 25?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hold on a sec. My mouse is acting weird. Okay, when there is a dispute between two parties and they go to law, and a decision is rendered declaring the one in the right and the other in the wrong, if the guilty one is to be flogged, the magistrate shall have the person lie down and shall supervise the giving of lashes by count as warranted by the offense. The guilty one may be given up to 40 lashes, but no more, lest being flogged further to excess your peers degraded before your eyes. You shall not muzzle an ox while it is threshing. When brothers dwell together and one of them dies and leaves no offspring, the wife of the deceased shall not become that of another party outside the family. Her husband's brother shall unite with her. He shall take her as his wife and perform the levir's duty. The first child that she bears shall be accounted to the dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out in Israel. But if that party does not want to take his brother's widow to wife, his brother's widow shall appear before the elders in the gate and declare, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name in Israel for his brother. He will not perform the duty of a levir. The eldest of his town shall then summon him and talk to him. If he insists, saying, I do not want to take her, his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull the sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and make this declaration. Thus shall be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house, and he shall go in Israel by the sandaled one.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Norman, would you like to read? We are on verse 11 of chapter 25. Okay. All right, let me invite Deborah Bard. Would you like to read a little bit? We're at verse 11 of chapter 25.
Yes, thank you. Verse 11 of 25. Okay. If two men get into a fight with each other, and the wife of one comes up to save her husband from his antagonist, and puts out her hand and seizes him by his genitals, you shall cut off her hand. Show no pity. You shall not have in your pouch alternate weights, larger and smaller. You shall not have in your house alternate measures, a larger and a smaller. You must have completely honest weights and completely honest measures if you are to endure long on the soil that the Lord your God is giving you. For everyone who does those things, everyone who deals dishonestly, is abhorrent to Adonai your God. Zachor, remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. How undeterred by fear of God, he surprised you on the march when you were famished and weary, and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when Adonai your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you in the land that Adonai your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That is our portion for the week. You have a copy of the study sheet. I invite you to take it out now. I'd love to share with you a little bit of focused study about it, and then we'll have our joint conversation about the Torah portion. You know, this Torah portion has in it more instructions, more laws than in any other portion. And yet, as I was reading through it, what caught my attention, what caught my eye, were the very opening words of our portion, Ki Teitzei, which translates as when you go out. I was carrying those words with me as we read through the portion, and then I remembered them as we got to the very closing words, which Deborah just shared with us. And these words are in chapter 25, verse 17. Remember what Amalek did to you on your way of going out from Egypt. So the same phrase, this notion of going out, appears at the very beginning and appears at the very end of the portion. It bookends everything that happens within it. So when I look at that framework, that structure, I thought there must be something significant about this concept about going out. And indeed, thinking more about it, what came to my mind is that this whole journey that we call the Exodus from Egypt all the way to the 40 years point that we're at now in this Torah portion that we're reading now, this whole journey is called Yetzirat Mitzrayim, the going out from Egypt. That's the way tradition identifies this journey from Exodus through Leviticus, through Numbers, through Deuteronomy. And that is gives framework to why we have the Passover Seder, because there's something that we are to remember about this journey. And indeed, back in the book of Exodus, chapter 13, verse 8, we have this phrase, "You shall tell your children, it is because of what God did for me in my going out from Egypt, B'tzeiti mi Mitzrayim." So this notion about remembrance then becomes primarily associated not so much with each individual commandments or laws or instructions or teachings that's in here, but the memory, the remembrance has to do with this whole experience of Yetzirat Mitzrayim, and it is an experience that is not just a historical experience that was had by a distinct group of people at a distinct place of location in a distinct period of time. There's something within the language itself that's indicating that we are on this journey and we are to give thanks for what we have encountered and experienced on this journey. So the remembrance becomes primarily associated with this phrase, this notion called the going out. And the going out is a reanimation in real time of that experience. And what we're to remember is not primarily the suffering, the grievances we've had, the injuries we've incurred, but the emergence or the deliverance from that enslavement. So as I thought about this notion about the significance of this phrase going out and how that's to be, if you will, an evocation and a reanimation in our own lives of this journey from slavery to freedom, an experience of liberation. You know, I thought about how we do try to express that during our Passover Seder, so that it's not just a telling of a history story, but it's really a dramatic enactment of our own journeys of freedom. I stumbled across some very interesting reading by some Christian evangelicals who have an understanding about the power of this reanimation of what appears to us as a story from thousands of years ago into our daily lives. So if you have the study sheet, I invite you to turn over on number 3. It's from evangelical Michael Horton, who wrote a book called The Christian Faith. And in that, he wrote this: "In our Western Greek intellectual heritage, remembering means recollecting, recalling to mind something that is no longer a present reality. Nothing could be further from a Jewish conception. In the Jewish liturgy, remembering means participating here and now in certain defining events in the past and also in the future." And a fellow evangelical minister, Dustin Crow, wrote this: "In the Bible, a call to remember is a vibrant, powerful, and participatory concept where we recalibrate our lives according to what's being remembered." So to have this sense of remembering, being associated with, that's what the going out is all about, is to re-experience and relive this journey that's being described here in this narrative, and to realize it's an experience happening in our own lives as well. I thought about, what does it mean to go out as a form of liberation? And so I turned to the Impressionists, who were the first painters to go out from their studios in order to paint. And for the Impressionists, it was not merely a going out as a nice place to paint, to be in nature. Their going out was also an act of liberation from over 1,000 years of constraint upon how artists painted, for whom they painted, what they painted, where they painted, and what eventually they did with the works that they created. Because for thousands of years, painters didn't even choose what they painted. They were commissioned. They were commissioned either during the Middle Ages by the Catholic Church, who provided them with what they wanted the artist to convey in terms of a message. And then later in the Renaissance, by rich families such as the Medici family, who would commission painters to create works for them that would display and promote their wealth and their elevated position and their power within society. And in both those cases, where painters worked was provided by their patrons, their sponsors. In the Middle Ages, mostly they'd probably be working in a monastery supplied by the church. In the Renaissance, if they were being commissioned by a family such as the Medicis would provide a studio, a workroom within which the artist would paint. And also the painters would be in their studios doing this work. The notion of going outside to paint what was outside was really not part of their approach, because the outside world was really just served as a background for conveying what their sponsors wanted to convey, which was some kind of historical, moral, or religious message. So it was not until the early 19th century that we have artists who, as an act of rebellion, if you will, against all these constraints that were being placed upon them, went outside. And not only did they go outside a studio to paint, they went outside the official framework of who was authorized to exhibit art. They went outside the framework of who owned the art. They went outside the framework of how to negotiate the sale of art. And all of that, which begins really with the Barbizon movement, and then is then taken to even higher level by their successors, the Impressionist movement, transforms and liberates artists to be able to paint what they choose to paint, to be able to choose how they want to paint it, how they want to express it, how they want to market and sell their art. So this going out that the Impressionists engage in is truly an act of liberation. So here we have this painting on the front by Claude Monet, which is the Rouen Cathedral in the West Facade. And Monet, over the course of a year, did, we think, over 30 sittings or 30 viewings of the Rouen Cathedral. And what's significant, really profound about this is that this cathedral, which was started in the 11th century and is finished in the 16th century, it was intended to convey this sense of eternality, its solidity, and the message that this profound and overwhelming piece of architecture was to convey was that the eternal is immovable, the eternal is unchanging, the eternal is always there. And what Monet does with this firm structure is, you can see he begins to fuzz, he begins to dissolve the clarity of those lines, and he introduces colors that were not the actual objective, if you will, colors of the cathedral itself. So he begins to tell us that, if you will, that what is always there is also ephemeral. What seems to be solid also has a lack of solidity to it. So it is, in a sense, an undermining of the very intention of the original architects of what's there. So he and his fellow impressionists expose the movement that is within every object, even something that is built of stone that took 500 years to build. And the Impressionists refuse to be bound by what the others may consider to be standards of what's real, what's true, what's objectively there, and they begin to insist upon the role of the artist's subjective experience and to bring that to us. And that begins, obviously, to undermine greatly a sense of control over the message that both the church and the wealthy aristocracy and those who are in the monarchies are trying to control the message that the people that they govern and that come into their pews hear. And so the Impressionists are the ones who begin to subvert that, if you will, and they encourage people to experience the world as they themselves experience it in their own unique personal way. And in fact, here back on our study sheet, number 4 is a quote from Claude Monet, who talks about what it means to go out. And when he says to go out, he means more than going out of your dwelling or out of your studio into nature. He means going outside of all the conventions that have been imposed upon you. So here's this quote. When you go out to paint, try to forget what objects you have before you, a tree, a house, a field, or whatever. Merely think, here's a little square of blue, here an oblong of pink, here a streak of yellow, and paint it as it looks to you, the exact color and shape. Okay. So this notion about Yitzirat Mitzrayim, the going out from Egypt, yes, it's both talking about a specific geography in the world, a country we can identify as Egypt. But in Jewish tradition, it takes on a more symbolic meaning. And here is what's being described by Yankee Tauber, who is building upon the teachings of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And he writes, Yetzirat Mitzrayim is the endeavor to rise above all that inhabits the soul, whether imposed by an outside force or by the physical, psychological, or spiritual limitations imposed by habit and nature. And so we return back to this preeminent experience that we have called the Passover Seder, which is guided and framed by what we've just read in our study sheet here. You shall tell your children. It's because of what God did for me in my going out from Egypt. So those of us who are elders in the community leading the Seder are to say, I have experienced this going out. I have experienced a liberation from what has been imposed upon me from outside, or that have been imposed upon me from within my own constraints and fears and anxieties. And I've experienced some kind of liberation. And that's what I want to share with you. And I'm going to share it with you by telling a story that's meant to symbolize that kind of journey. So I have also on the study sheet this quote from, these are concepts that came from a Jewish French philosopher, Pierre Nora, who studied memorials within France. And he came to this understanding, and he used these 2 different terms. He said there's something called lieu de mémoire and milieu de mémoire. And lieu de mémoire, a place of memory, he identified with those places where we build monuments, where we create physical sites that are meant to memorialize an event that happened. And these, he said, these begin to have an official explanation. They solidify, if you will, they concretize, they freeze a past event and give it an official explanation. And these are important, he acknowledges. But he says there's another kind of memory, and that's what he means by milieu de mémoire, which is a milieu, an environment of memory. And he just describes these as a real living environment of collective consciousness that is in permanent evolution. It's both absolute and spontaneous. And what he means by that is we tell stories. People tell stories about what has happened. And as we tell the stories, yes, we're conveying something that has been handed down to us, but we're also infusing something that is quite personal to us. And he, in his work, he worries about the loss of that kind of environment of memory, that we're surrendering the storytelling and handing it over to the mere construction of physical sites, which have singular and solidified meanings. So I find it fascinating that this Torah portion, which conveys the most laws of any Torah portion in Torah, which is right towards the virtual end of the journey that the Israelites are on in the 5 books of Moses, as they're on the verge getting ready to cross over into the land of promise, that we have this message about how important it is to go out, to discover our own place in this journey, and to discover that it's a journey happening within each one of us as well. So with that, I'd love to know what you experienced and what you saw in our portion. And Rose, you have your hand up, so please share with us.
Yeah, I just have a couple points and I'll go through them very quickly. Thank you, Rabbi. First of all, this is Moshe's valedictory speech. This is the valedictory speech, and it's just like the valedictorian or the speaker at a graduation. I mean, that's what this is. Like, okay, students, graduates of whatever year you're going forward, da-da-da. That's says. Parenthetically, I found the thing about that the Moabites and none of their descendants should be part of Israel really weird, since Ruth, the ancestor of King David, was a Moabite. So that's kind of weird. From the art standpoint, when you're talking about memory and Monet and all this, I'm thinking about Ravel, the Tombeau de Couperin, because that's what it's about. It's about ostensibly he's visiting the tomb of Couperin, who's a great composer, but he's actually meditating on the memories of people that he lost, friends that he lost in the First World War. So very much that's what's going on. And when you're talking about going out, leaving the box, leaving the narrow space, leaving Mitzrayim, I'm thinking about, well before the plein air painters and the Impressionists and these people who are valuing subjectivity and subjective experience, you have kind of a rule breaker, and I'm thinking of the painter Velázquez, and he paints, I'm trying to remember the name of it, it's Las Memenitas, the painting, the famous painting where you have a little princess.
Las Meninas.
Meninas, thank you, Catherine. I knew you would know. Where it's ostensibly a painting of this little princess and all her attendants who happen to be dwarfs, and the king and queen are standing there. But he escapes the whole thing. He has this whole thing like that you're seeing people, the king and queen in a mirror. So he's really playing with space and time, and he's in the picture. He's probably, you look at the little girl, because she's kind of eye candy. But he is the important one in the painting, and he makes himself the most important one in the painting. So he's standing there with his palette looking very swaggery. So he's kind of escaped from that servitude. And I don't know what you were saying before about, painting for these patrons. I don't know if anybody used to read the New Yorker magazine years
yeah.
ago, but there's a famous cartoon where there's the painter, like the Renaissance painter, and the patron. And the wealthy patron is saying to this guy, he says, put more angels in this picture and make them happier to see me.
Thank you, Rose. You brought so much rich material into the discussion, and I'm so glad that you brought up about the story of Ruth. Of course, that's a story that the rabbis have advised us to read during Shavuot, when we're celebrating the actual moment at Mount Sinai and the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. And of course, as you point out, Ruth was a Moabite, and that seems to be in complete conflict with the very clear rule that we've just read here just a few moments ago. No Moabite shall be a member of the congregation of Israel. And so the rabbis read that, and how can they reconcile the fact that we have this clear black letter rule, no Moabites shall be admitted to the congregation of people of Israel, and the fact that Ruth becomes I think it's the great grandmother of the greatest king, the great warrior king, King David. How can we reconcile that this was allowed to happen? And so they read this and say, well, what Torah means there is no male Moabite, but it's okay with the female Moabite. It's okay. So in a sense, if you will, I don't want to overextend the metaphor here, but in a sense, the rabbis themselves are engaging in some kind of going out. They're going outside what seems to be the very clear instructions, the black letter framework that they inherited. And they're able to fuzz up, if you will, the language there to say, it's just referring to the men, it's not referring to the women. So it's quite, they're doing a work of artistry of their own. They're trying to not obliterate the connection between what's in Torah and what is now happening in real life centuries later. But on the other hand, they realize that there's a need to insert some level of creativity in order to make all of this ongoing and viable. So thanks very much for bringing all that up. Let me call upon Catherine, and then David Susan and Robert. Catherine, please.
Okay, well, I don't have anything nearly as eloquent to say, except I was struck by the painting, first of all, how cinematic it is. That we sense that this is kind of like a zoom lens, which means that the focus is not so sharp, and it's also not a frontal angle, but an oblique angle, sort of looking up at this cathedral. And so it seems to loom larger than it might in real life. And it also evokes the way that in the Parshat, things are out of kilter. And so we sort of keep going through these lists of things that need to be redressed.
Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
So, and we need to devise these strategies to resolve those. And sometimes it's not so pleasant.
Yeah, I'm so excited by these ideas that you're bringing into the discussion, because what it got me to realize, first of all, the Impressionists were greatly impacted, affected, and intrigued by photography. Okay, and then also your notion about cinema in particular. Sometimes the capacity to create an out of focus image brings something that we might not otherwise notice clearer to us. And in a sense, maybe that's what's happening here with Monet and his painting, which is he has fuzzed up the clarity that you would experience if you were standing right in front of the structure itself. And perhaps his making it appear out of focus brings our attention to something that we might not otherwise see there. Which
Yes.
you want to say some more about that?
No, that's it.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, let me invite Robert to go ahead first, and then we've got David and Susan, and then Mark. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for another lovely evening. And I just want to say to Catherine that eloquence is one thing, but sweetness is another. And there are many beautiful ways to communicate, and you're always very sweet in the way you communicate. So, you know, eloquence is just one little thread. I love the theme tonight, going out, because I really want to go out of the box tonight. I love being out of the box in my thinking. I have no use for packaged thinking unless it has some value. You know, the package is good, the wrapping is good, and what's inside is good. Let me put out some terms for you. Globalization, world unity, science, and this is what I want to get to, modernity. So we live in a world where these concepts, quantum mechanics, quantum field theory, et cetera, are part of modernity. We look back thousands of years to Moses, and we say, well, this is ancient thinking. So I want to go out of the box, and I think it's very defensible to say that Moses was the king of modernity of his time. What he brought was so modern, whether we like it in terms of today, I think he knew more than we do because we couldn't do what he did. And very frankly, the Jewish people wouldn't be here and the Christian people wouldn't be here if it weren't for Moses. And Baha'u'llah is a descendant of Abraham. I mean, that whole line, right? Now, in his day, he was modern. By definition, dictionary definition. And one can say, well, there are just so many laws. I'm sorry, we have, I don't know how many millions of laws on the books in the local, county, state, and federal government. Nobody knows all of them. There are literally millions. And last I heard, there were 500,000 different governments at one of those 4 levels in the United States. So those laws and that complexity exist today, but we accept it because, and we move forward with the idea of globalization, science. Science didn't exist really until the coming of Muhammad, very frankly. We didn't have zero before that, mathematics, algebra, medicine, etc. Moses did the same thing for his time. I think he's the king of modernity because if we lived then, his concepts would be so modern, so out of the norm. Now, by their proof ye shall know them, cause and effect. Were they really modern? Were they really good? What happened to the Jewish people, Hebrew Commonwealth? So I wanted to share that. And I was thinking about that earlier this week, and it was so radical. But I thought, you know, what does it mean to be a modern man or a modern woman? What does this word modernity mean? Because every day, modernity is born anew. Every day the sun rises, modernity takes on a new level because the most modern is that day. We move back 10 days, it wasn't quite as modern as today. So it's not that I want you all to agree, but I think it's a wonderful thing to think about. And I love to give Moses justice. I'm sorry, you know, I think he's a manifestation of God. I think God sent him. And as a Baha'i, I have so much respect for Moses. And so I think of him now as the king of modernity.
So,
Thank you.
Barbara, I'm so intrigued that you emphasize this term of modernity in this particular portion when we're showing this particular painting, because the Impressionists are considered to be the launchers of the foundation of modern art, which is the release. In that definition, it's the release of the artist to paint what they wish to paint. It's the release of the artist to be able to market the artist as they wish to market it, and so forth. So it's very interesting that you bring that notion of modernity when we're looking at the beginnings of modern art on our study sheet. So let me call upon David, and then Mark, and then Norman. So go ahead, David and Susan.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Ruth the Moabite again, who I consider an icon of Jewish halakhic thinking. 3,500 years ago, the Moabites were real jerks to us. And so our reaction, and the reaction of our leadership, was to ostracize them completely and write a law that was carved into stone that they should never be entered into the congregation of Israel. And as we all know, Ruth was entered into and it seems like every time I read this, a contradiction. Well, in Rabbinic Judaism, and in Judaism going back before Rabbinic Judaism, how do you deal with laws that are not appropriate anymore? If they're in Torah, you don't repeal them, you reread them. And that's what happened regarding Ruth and the exclusion of Moabites. But in traditional Judaism, when we encounter halachot or traditions or attitudes that need to be changed, we're not allowed, and reform, of course, is different. We're not allowed to just say, we're changing the rule. Reform changes the rule, but traditional Judaism does not. It rereads it until it's sometimes 180 degrees different from what it started to be. So different from our American and British understanding of the laws. You have to repeal a bad law or amend a bad law through your lawmaking processes. But the Jewish ones are different because our lawmaking processes have to be founded on Torah, Talmud, etc. So this brings me to a wrestle that I've had for years with Judaism, and that is, I learn constantly from you, Rabbi, that our tradition is a tradition of overturning, of change, of turning and turning and turning and turning. And I'm always asking, yeah, but you can go too far. You can destroy the community if you continually overturn things. People need some consistency. So you need to not do it too fast or too badly. But how do you know where the line is? And the answer I keep getting up to now is, you just know. You take your best guess.
No, go ahead, David.
But this tradition of how to understand our halachot is a guide rail. If you have to twist yourself that far to change something, you're hesitant to do it. So there, in traditional Judaism, there's a lot of hesitancy to change things, tradition. But this is a guideline, because it isn't. We aren't just tradition, but we never leave tradition behind.
Yeah. I thank you, David. I think you've highlighted, one of the rich tensions that's within Judaism, which it is both tradition bound and interpretive powered. And you're right that there's always the question about how can you get too attenuated from the tradition so that you are no longer, so that you are now unmoored from it. And so that's one of the great rich sources of creative tension that exists within the Judaism. So thank you for emphasizing all that. And let me go to Mark, and then Norman, and then Richard here. Mark Thompson, please.
Thank you. And speaking of emphasis, I want to commend Deborah for emphasizing the word zachor, remember. She said it in Hebrew, and you indicated earlier that that was very important for us. And so thank you, Deborah. Couple of things. First, Betsy and I were fortunate enough last year to be in Rouen, and we saw the cathedral, and the cathedral was under restoration. So there was scaffolding all around. And it was, I'm sure, a very different feeling for us than it would have been for Monet, because there were several rock and roll bands playing surrounding the church. The church seemed to be sort of there, but not really part of the experience, especially since it was under construction. You didn't really get a full sense of its power. I did want to ask you a question. You mentioned that the Impressionists received from photographers some of their ideas, or was it the other way around?
Yeah, no, they were greatly impacted by, and many of them were greatly influenced by photography, yeah, which was, of course, introduced mid-19th century. Yeah, so go ahead.
Okay. The other thing is, I just find that the title of our Torah portion, Ki Teitzei, it's almost contradictory to what appears in everything that follows. I mean, Ki Teitzei, we left Egypt, but then now in the sense of liberation, yes, we've been liberated from Egypt, but now we're constrained by so many rules. And I thought it was interesting, Robert's point that, at that time that was modernity. It was revolutionary what Moses did. So then it occurred to me, well, when you are given a set of rules that stringent, do they provide you with a sense of liberation because you know what the constraints are and you know what's right and what's wrong, and therefore you're freer to do what you should be doing? That was just a question that I was asking myself in the process of figuring out what this Torah portion was about.
No, I think that's rich, and you've also highlighted, a very profound meta question, which is, to what extent does a framework provide you with freedom, and to what extent does a framework provide you with a constraint? So,
right.
I think that's really a great question. So, I'm so glad you had that experience of seeing this cathedral, and how fascinating that it was.
I'll have to send you some photographs. I
Yeah,
think we took
lovely.
some.
And just one more, we could have a whole session on the impact that photography had on Impressionists, because it was a very profound experience.
Really, that's interesting. Okay.
So let me invite Norman and then Richard. Yeah.
Well, this is so rich. There's so many great thoughts that have come up. We're going down the rabbit hole of changing things and going out. And whether it's a rabbit hole or a wormhole, or whether it's going through a door into a whole other universe of possibilities, I guess depends on the circumstances. I can see where Monet's painting could have been looked upon by some people as totally subversive, because the idea of the cathedral is that it's built and it's something that we're showing to you when you come into and you partake of, but you don't change. But that's exactly what Monet is doing. He's changing it. It's his impression. And if I'm reading between Monet's lines, he's saying the cathedral is exactly what you mean it to be, what you understand it to be, what you want it to be. which I don't think is the idea that its creators had in mind. What does this have to do with Ruth? Ruth was, or the story was criticized because Ruth was a Moabite, and we're not supposed to marry a Moabite. And then there's this Talmudic kind of workaround that says, well, it doesn't apply to women, it applies to men. But I was wondering about this. So I interviewed Ruth. I talked with her. And I said, Ruth, what in the world do you have to say about this? All the men are talking about it, but has anybody come to talk to you about it? And she says, I am defining myself. I am not going to be defined by my birth. I've joined the Jewish people, and I'm a Jewish now. I'm not a Moabite anymore. Problem solved. Ruth, I think, was, if not the first, one of the first feminists in saying that someone else's rules and men's rules are not going to define me.
Norm, thank you so much. First of all, I think it's wonderful that you had that conversation with Ruth, and also I think it's wonderful that you brought up this image about going down a rabbit hole, because the origin of that phrase, of course, is from Alice in Wonderland, where she goes down rabbit holes, and the question is, especially for Lewis Carroll, who's writing it when he does, what does that mean to go down a rabbit hole? Is it to leave behind the real world and go into a fantasy world? Or is it to enter into another dimension of this world in which you can see things differently, and you're released from the conventions of the world that you've been living in, and hopefully come back from that and live a transformed life?
Exactly. And those who thought to restrict how the cathedral would be accepted and how it would be understood, I think did not understand that that's not where the future is. That's not where the possibilities are. The possibilities are opening up things for people's understanding and interpretation.
And it's beautiful. And, if it's possible, of course, to go back to David's point about tradition and innovation, it's possible to have this new experience about what is there when one sees this cathedral, and to then infuse the actual structure of the cathedral with that new insight and that innovation, if you will. So let me call upon Richard. Yeah.
Yes, three little things. One is going out to see things in the natural light, not in the light of a person who commissioned you to do a perfect picture of this wonderful thing. It's about the human contact with it, not the ideal of it. And I also want to say about Ruthie, I had a little conversation with her too. And she said, whither thou goest, I shall go. End of sentence, end of issue. The woman decided, and that was that. And the last thing, the word remember, I see it as in the syllables, it's remember. Put life back in it. We're not going to just remember and tell the story that's back then. We're going to act it out right now because we're in it. We brought that time right here, and we're going to give it life because it attains to us. So it's not remember as a recollect, but remember. Bring the juice back into the moment.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. So now we are sharing this notion about this going out is meant to be a reanimation of something that has always been there, but it's a reanimation by giving it new life, because we bring our own insights to it, our own creativity to it. And it's one thing to have that as an individual, but to be able to create that and share that as part of a community is really what coheres us together, so that we don't, as David has expressed his concerns, we don't become unmoored and just become these atomized beings out there in the world. So I want to thank each and every one of you for contributing so much to creating the kind of community that allows us to tether ourselves to the module and to go out and explore and to bring back into the module what we've encountered with our new vision about what the world literally can look like and what we have the capacity to shape it into. Thank you so much, everyone. God bless you all. I look forward to our next gathering, and thank you, Rose, for all your wonderful comments that are in the chat section. Wonderful contributions. So much appreciate everyone. Thank you. God bless you all.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you
night.
so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Be well, everybody. Thank you.